All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining your hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkley Group, who's also doing this webinar today. Your hour with APA Virginia is hosted on the fourth Monday of each month from noon to 1 p.m. I'm going to give everyone a minute to get in and get settled before we begin today. All right, thank you again for joining our webinar today. Before we get started, we wanted to remind you of a few exciting things APA Virginia has coming up and a couple of housekeeping items. To start today, we just wanted to say thank you to all of our attendees, sponsors, planning committee, and our board for an amazing virtual conference. We could not have done it without you. If you missed a few sessions or if you would like to just look at some things again, all recordings will be posted by November 1st. And mark your calendars for the November webinar on Monday, November 16th. Please note that is a week early due to the Thanksgiving holiday. From noon to 1 p.m., our focus will be on streetlight metrics and how location-based services data compared to typical surveys represents the population at large. As we do every month, this webinar, Planning for Utility Scale Solar Energy Facilities, will be recorded and posted to our YouTube page by the end of the day. We encourage you to visit our YouTube and see past webinars or share it with colleagues. As a reminder, we will hold all questions until the end, but as the webinar is going on, please feel free to type your questions in the question box on your dashboard, and we will answer them at the end in the order in which they came in. Again, thank you to the Berkley Group for making this webinar series possible. We are always looking for new webinar presenters or topics. If you have one you would like us to look into, please email admin@apavirginia.com. I'm actually going to turn it over to our presenters. This month's webinar, titled Planning for Utility Scale Solar Energy Facilities, is presented by Darren Coffey. Darren is a co-founder, principal, and the director of strategic partnerships at the Berkley Group, a planning consulting firm based in Virginia and serving local governments around the country. Darren's experience provides comprehensive knowledge and skills in local government from administration, planning, budgeting, economic development, grant administration, transportation, parks and recreation, among others. He has a geography and economics degree. Rebecca Cobb. Rebecca is a senior planner at the Berkley Group. She has collaborated on and revised comprehensive plans, zoning ordinances, and subdivision ordinances. She has experience assisting multiple localities with solar applications and document amendments. She has a biology degree with a minor in environmental studies from Longwood University. And Denise Nelson. Denise is an environmental engineer at the Berkley Group. She has global experience in water, wastewater, and stormwater systems and sustainable infrastructure development. She has a civil engineering degree from Virginia Tech and an environmental engineering Master of Science degree from the University of Cincinnati. So at this time, I will mute myself and hand it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Paige. Welcome, everybody. We hope you enjoy your lunch, and thank you for joining us for this webinar series. This webinar is associated with the American Planning Association's Planning Advisory Service memo by the same title from last September and October. And we'll be presenting one of the three topics you see on the screen and then have time for questions and answers at the end. Solar voltaics are the fastest growing energy source in the world due to the decreasing cost per kilowatt hour and the comparative speed of installing the panels. Today's presentation focuses on PV panels and not other types of solar energy generation. The cost of solar technology has decreased by 80% since 2010. Transitioning from coal plants to solar significantly decreases carbon dioxide emissions and eliminates sulfur, nitrous oxides, and mercury emissions. The U.S. Department of Energy states As the cleanest domestic energy source available, solar supports broader national priorities, including national security, economic growth, climate change mitigation, and job creation. PV installations are easily scalable. You can use panels to supply energy on site to your home or business, or you can use panels as part of your public energy utility. Utility scale solar, or solar farms, as they're commonly referred to, is an energy generation facility that supplies power to the grid. These facilities are generally more than 2 acres in size and have capacities in excess of 1 megawatt. Today's utility scale solar facilities may encompass hundreds or even thousands of acres. Utility scale solar installations are the most cost-effective solar PV option. From 2008 to 2019, U.S. solar PV installations have grown from generating 1.2 gigawatts to 30 gigawatts, according to the Solar Energy Industries Association. This map shows the installed solar PV capacity in each state, with the darkest blue representing greater than 25,000 megawatts. The top 10 states are also listed here. The demand for clean energy from the private sector is also growing significantly. Businesses are recognizing that going green is a smart business move for saving money and marketing. This results in increased industrial efficiency, transparent reporting, and green labels. Shown here are the 100 companies that have agreed to go 100% green energy. The demand for clean energy from the public sector is also growing. State and local governments across the country are developing climate action plans and setting goals to both mitigate the impacts of climate change and to reduce the generation of greenhouse gases. The increased use of solar energy is a key component of many of these action plans. The states shown here have adopted 100% clean energy legislation or executive orders with either a goal or a mandate. Rhode Island is targeting 100% renewable by 2030. By 2040, Connecticut and New York, then Washington, New Mexico, Hawaii, and California by 2045. By 2050, Colorado, Virginia, New Jersey, Maine, Wisconsin, and Nevada will also have achieved that goal. Oregon, Vermont, and Maryland have committed to less than 100% clean energy, and they're shown in the darker gray. The Commonwealth's southern location and geography make it a great state for installing solar power. In addition, state mandated incentives and tax exemptions have further incentivized solar development. The 2018 Virginia Energy Plan called for 3,000 megawatts of solar and onshore wind to be deployed by 2022 and a total of 5,500 megawatts by 2028. The Virginia Energy Plan commits the Commonwealth to the deployment of 30% renewables by 2030 and realizing 100% carbon-free electric power by 2040. The Virginia Clean Economy Act establishes a mandatory renewable energy portfolio standard where Dominion Energy and American Electric Power are required to produce their electricity from 100% renewable sources by 2045 and 2050, respectively. This will increase the obligations of local governments and state agencies tasked with land use, permitting, and environmental decision-making. These mandates and incentives have accelerated the energy industry's efforts to bring facilities online as quickly as possible. The majority of these utility-scale solar facilities are handled at the local level, and this has created a new challenge for local governments, as many are still unprepared to properly consider this unique land use option. Many localities are struggling to determine how to evaluate utility-scale solar facility applications. I'm going to hand it over to Denise Nelson and then Rebecca Cobb to discuss how localities should properly evaluate the overall impacts of the utility-scale solar energy land use on a community.
But first, I have a few quick statistics for you on the growth of the solar industry in Virginia. Since 2014, the state has approved nearly 60 permits for utility-scale solar facilities and have received about just as many in notice of intent for future permits. This data comes from DEQ, who shares a lot of information publicly And a few of the permits are processed by the SCC, who does not share quite as publicly, so the numbers may actually be a little bit higher. Of those permitted facilities, they will generate nearly 3,000 megawatts of power, and the additional projects with notices will generate an additional 3,000 megawatts. The permitted facilities will use nearly 40,000 acres of land in Virginia, and the additional projects with notices will use another 33,000 acres. That's approximately 10 to 12 acres for every megawatt produced. Where are all of those projects? This map shows the 37 localities with solar facility permits in green and the additional 15 localities with notices of intent in blue. So the facilities are going to cover the state. What do you need to know? Utility scale solar facilities typically include the photovoltaic panels, the PV panels, inverters, a substation, a switch yard, and a generator lead line, which is a gen tie line, to interconnect to an existing grid transmission line. They may include battery storage. That's a whole other topic. We could easily give another presentation on the implications of using battery storage, so we'll skip that for now. Solar development happens at the local level. Solar developers identify potential sites, contact landowners regarding land sales and leases, and prepare development applications. They also coordinate with the state for permits, the local power company who will eventually acquire the project, and the regional power transmission organization. On the East Coast, PJM coordinates electricity in 13 states and DC. Notifying PJM gets the project in a long queue for a power study that might not happen for another 3 to 4 years. So a lot of these things are happening concurrently, and many times they are all happening before the applicant notifies the local government. Now let's talk about land use concerns. First, this will likely be a change in land use. Developers like flat sites, so they are looking at agricultural and timber lands. This is a big change to an industrial type land use. Consider the effort to prepare the site for the solar facility, and then later, the effort to return the site to its previous land use at the end of the facility's life. The site may be graded, and high quality topsoil could be lost. The prolonged maintenance of solar-friendly ground cover could change the characteristics of the soil, making a return to agricultural use more difficult. Developers typically propose removing equipment to 3 feet below the surface, leaving deeper footers, posts, and wires after deconstruction that may pose a problem for reuse in agriculture. And then, of course, site restoration to a forest can take quite some time to regrow. It is recommended to preserve prime farmland and forest land and save those for those uses. In many rural areas, industrially zoned land is limited, and local governments place a premium on industries that create and retain well-paying jobs. Solar facilities are a poor choice for these lands, as they take up quite a bit of land and generate few jobs. Replacing agricultural uses with residential uses is a more typical land use planning concern, and in some cases, is anticipated and desired over time. Land identified as residential in the future land use map should be preserved. Land near existing infrastructure, typical of cities, towns, and villages, is a logical location for future residential or commercial uses. It should also be reserved. Consider invisible areas where equipment is difficult to detect. The prior use of the land has been marginal, or there is no designated future use specified. Consider sites that have few other use options, such as contaminated sites or capped landfills. DEQ has an office focused to help localities with this. Consider locations near transmission lines. These are desirable because they require less new transmission infrastructure, and that infrastructure is hard to screen or hide. This map shows solar panels in dark blue on a site chosen because it includes the intersection of two transmission lines shown in red. You may want to determine criteria to mitigate the negative potential impacts of these facilities on county land use patterns, such as having the site further than 2 miles from any city or town, or within 1 mile of an electric transmission line. Another concern is the size. It's hard to imagine land uses as large as a utility-scale solar facility. In Virginia, we've seen utility-scale facilities ranging from 2 to 500 megawatts. A rough rule of thumb is that 1 megawatt requires approximately 10 acres of land, including setbacks in other undeveloped areas. That means we're talking about projects that cover 20 acres, about the size of the White House complex, to projects that cover 5,000 acres, which is larger than the National Mall. And if Virginia meets our 2028 goal of 5,500 megawatts with only utility-scale solar, that will require approximately 55,000 acres, which is an area larger than all of Washington, D.C. Any large-scale homogeneous land use should be carefully examined, whether it's rooftops, pavement, or solar panels. They can change the character of the area and alter the natural and historic development pattern of a community. These projects also create significant changes to surface water flows and wildlife patterns. They can be hard to screen. You may want to determine criteria to mitigate the negative impacts, such as limiting the total size to 2,000 acres or 3,000 acres. You'll also want to consider the concentration of solar facilities in the community. Greensville County, Virginia, near the North Carolina border, decided to limit the size of solar facilities to about 1,000 acres. But what do you do when developers propose projects beside each other? One solar facility in a given geographic area may be an acceptable use of land. But when multiple facilities are attracted to the same geography for the same reasons, such as the location of the transmission line, this tips the land use balance too much toward one single use. You may want to determine criteria to mitigate negative impacts, such as requiring that solar facilities be 2 or more miles apart from each other, or requiring a maximum percentage of solar coverage that can be installed in a 5-mile square area. Then you'll want to consider the impacts on the community. The least controversial solar facility is the one that is out of sight and out of mind. First, you should avoid and preserve historic sites. You should consider impacts on view sheds and scenic byways. Setbacks and vegetated screening should be required. Some localities have used the setbacks required in agricultural districts and found them wildly insufficient. Consider creating new setbacks for solar facilities, such as the ones listed here, and putting them in the zoning ordinance as a requirement or in the development conditions for more flexibility. Limit the height of panels and accessory structures to reduce visibility. Also, limit the height of the lowest point of the panels to 10 feet to minimize erosion. Fencing should be required for safety, and it should be inside the screening. Lighting nuisance should be minimized. Lighting during operations should be minimal, so you may want to stipulate how to control lighting during construction. These pictures show flat sites and screening, but you may need to adjust the location of screening on steep slopes. You should also consider the impacts on the environment. You should avoid and preserve ecologically sensitive areas, such as wetlands, special habitats, etc. Preserve topsoil and use native, non-invasive vegetation and pollinator species where compatible. You should consider the impact of lighting and fencing on birds and animals. Fencing around groups of panels with open areas in between provides wildlife corridors for natural migration and movement of animals. The image here shows yellow lines for wildlife corridors along streams and wetlands that are already buffered and protected from construction. The Department of Wildlife Resources recommends 40 acres as a maximum fenced area without wildlife corridors. There are also special types of fencing to allow smaller animals through the bottom section. Consider the impact of construction. The selection of panels and arrangement on site should be optimized to minimize grading. The impervious nature of panels themselves creates stormwater runoff that must be properly controlled, managed, and maintained. These projects require the submission of both stormwater and erosion and sediment control plans to comply with federal and state environmental regulations. Rural and agricultural localities may not have the capacity or expertise to review plans for such large projects. In that case, we recommend having the plans reviewed by a licensed third party at the expense of the applicant. We've also seen the local government ask the applicant to pay for an independent contractor to complete all required site inspections during construction. In addition, consideration should be given to limiting the total amount of clearing and grading that occurs on a site at one time. It's highly recommended to do this in stages, starting one section after the first section has been stabilized. Plan ahead for decommissioning. It's hard to imagine what our life will look like in 35 to 45 years. Will current county staff still be working here? Who will own the solar facility? How much will it cost to remove? Decommissioning can cost millions. Who is going to pay for that? We recommend requiring applicants to submit a decommissioning plan, cost estimate, and security. In the plan, we recommend requiring complete removal of all equipment. However, we've always had a discussion with applicants and landowners about things that the landowner might want to retain, such as fences and roads, and things that are more disruptive to remove than they were to install, such as the driven piles or any conduit that was bored in. We recommend a cost estimate that does not account for the eventual salvage value of the removed materials, just because we have no idea what that market will look like that far out. We also recommend having the owner or operator provide a security for decommissioning cost and updating that cost estimate and security every 5 years. The worst possible outcome for a community and a landowner would be an abandoned utility-scale solar facility with no resources available to pay for its removal. Also consider the fiscal impact on the community. The locality may generate revenue from increased real estate tax. The land may be changing from agricultural to now this industrial scale use and being taxed at a higher rate. There may also be rollback taxes if the land was previously in an agricultural assessment. And now in 2020, new legislation allows for revenue from a conditional use, condition in your conditional use permit for a reasonable payment. Another legislation allows for a siting agreement in qualified areas for projects that are over 5 megawatts, and that can include payments. And then there's also the option of using a revenue share ordinance or taking advantage of the machinery and tools tax generated from the solar facility. We have looked at all of these options in depth and are prepared to help localities optimize the revenue for any given project. We could spend a whole nother hour on that topic as well, so I'll keep moving on for now. I did want to point out, though, that the state has indicated that solar facilities will not impact the community's composite index. And the other fiscal impacts for our community are the revenue that the landowner generates from the sale or lease of the land, and the potential impacts from local employment or bringing in contractors that will then need to eat and sleep and live locally, primarily during a construction period of 1 year to 2 years, depending on the size of the facility. But then there are a few jobs generated during the operations phase. There will likely be a lot of concerns from the community as they learn about this new land use. They will have questions about all types of negative impacts, the visual impacts, potential pollution, property taxes increasing or property values decreasing, construction traffic, all sorts of things. The planning staff, the commissioners, and the governing body may also have questions and concerns. If you expect to see solar facility proposals, we recommend starting stakeholder engagement early. Ideally, you could start it before there is a specific project in mind or a public hearing scheduled, so you can conduct educational sections, community workshops, and maybe even solar facility tours. We recommend reaching out to the residents and the landowners, the planning staff, including the stormwater and erosion sediment control staff, and then the Planning Commission and the governing body. Feel free to point them to this webinar or the associated memo. Also be aware there's a lot of false information floating around on the internet. Some people might find this and bring this up at public hearings. So I'd recommend being proactive with education and pointing to legitimate resources like this one here, specifically on the health and safety of photovoltaics. There are also other reliable sources of information on the internet. We have the new Virginia Solar Initiative. There are sites from the federal government and a few different industry associations. You will definitely appreciate the resources at these links when your citizens and stakeholders come and start asking you questions from less reliable sources. How do we process these solar facility applications? We're going to talk about facilities that are larger than 5 megawatts. So first, there's the state requirement. The state requires that the local planning commission determine if the public utility facility is substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan. Now, there is an exception to this when the local governing body agrees to negotiate a siting agreement with the applicants. And once that's determined, the state reviews the application submitted to make sure the technical and financial fitness of the applicant is secure, to make sure the application mitigates the effects, negative effects on the environment or the economy, to look at the effects of reliability of electric service in the region, and to make sure that the facility is not contrary to the public interest. Then there are 2 pathways for acquiring a permit. DEQ administers the permit by rule process for facilities that are 5 to 150 megawatts. This is a 14-step process. I've listed them all here in super tiny font, but the keys to remember are the application to DEQ is the permit. It's the developer's responsibility and it's DEQ's responsibility. This is an assumed implied permit as long as the applicant submits all of these items complete in their entirety, the permit is given. DEQ has a statutory limit of 90 days to complete the review of the permit, and there is an expedited process for a 60-day review. Now, the other process is through the State Corporation Commission. And this comes into effect when there's a solar energy project that will increase the customer rate for paying for the energy, that will include a transmission line, or that will include storage. So when a project goes to the SCC, they process the application in a court proceeding style. They'll have public notice, and they'll have an opportunity for public comment and testimonies. There'll be public hearing, and then they'll make the final order and issue the permit. And then we get to the local requirements. Localities process a solar application just like any other land use permit. The basic process includes a review of the application by the planning department, the review of the application by the planning commission, and holding a public hearing, making a recommendation to the governing board. The governing board reviews the application, has a public hearing, and makes a final decision. Rebecca is now going to go into more detail on the tools and resources localities use in making these decisions.
Hello. So yes, thank you, Denise. In this segment, we're going to talk about what should be in your comprehensive plans as guidance, what should be in your zoning ordinance as regulations, and then also conditions for permits. And because all solar facilities are not created equal, there should be project-specific conditions, and they should reflect the scale and the impact of the facility. So first up, looking at your comprehensive plan, many plans place importance on ag operations, on historic or scenic sites. It also usually points to a strong economy and job creation. And so if it's silent on solar, then this can be a barrier for approving solar uses. So the first question to ask is, does the community desire such large-scale land use? And do the impacts on ag, forestry, or other concerns, should it not be allowed, or is there another way to address it in your locality? So basically the things that Denise brought up, if those were triggering things for you, then those are things that you want to work into your comprehensive plan. If your locality isn't accepting a siting agreement and will be conducting a 2232 review, then that's another reason to make sure the plan addresses solar specifically. Once the plan has been reviewed and you consider what are the appropriate amendments, the amendments should guide solar industry to your preferred locations and away from areas that would not be suitable. The way to do this is through specific metrics, such as locating on brownfields and landfills, or locating within a certain distance of a transmission line. You also want to indicate where you want to stay away from. So have specific metrics related to how far they should be away from cities and towns, distance from other solar sites to minimize that density, as Denise was mentioning. Also considering your residential areas or other environmentally sensitive areas. And one good way to do this is through maps. And so a lot of comprehensive plans already include maps. For example, your prime farmland maps or steep slopes, wetlands and floodplains. But you could include some additional maps as well, or create one similar to what's shown here on the right, where the areas in red demonstrate where you would not accept solar sites, and the areas in green demonstrate where they might be acceptable. And so there's many state resources for evaluating development locations. These are some of our favorite resources. They can help with your comprehensive data and your mapping, as well as during application reviews. Each site includes much more information than what we've listed here, so we'd suggest you take a look at those and see what your community could use. Once the comprehensive plan is done, what about your zoning ordinance? The comprehensive plan is your guidance document, but your zoning ordinance is the regulatory document, and you want it to match the desires of your comprehensive plan. Consider in which districts they would be appropriate and what will be the standard use requirements. Definitions are very important to include with your ordinance. At a minimum, define each type of solar facility. You also want to define other terms like battery storage, decommissioning, project site. Basically, any technical terms or jargon that gets used and is not already in your definitions and in your ordinance, you want to include it in your definitions section. You want to amend the zoning ordinance to include the solar regulations as an article or separate section of the ordinance. And this makes it easier for staff and the public and potential applicants to find the information. The article should include a statement of intent that outlines the purpose. And often the purpose is to establish requirements for construction and operation and to provide standards for the placement, design, construction, and removal, and to address public safety and minimize impacts. The applicability should also be addressed and should apply to all solar facilities constructed after the effective date of the article, and include any physical modifications to any existing solar facilities that materially alter the type, configuration, or size of such facility or other equipment. Regarding zoning districts, in most cases, you want to amend to require utility scale facilities obtain a conditional permit, while the smaller scale sites can be by right with use standards. The application and procedures section of the solar article should specifically outline what the applicant can expect and what they need to provide. Some requirements include a pre-application meeting. The applicant and the staff can gain a lot of valuable information at a pre-application meeting. For example, the picture to the right is a site that backed up to a lot of dwellings. And during the pre-application meeting, this can be brought up. There can be talk of additional setbacks, additional buffering, landscaping that might be required in those areas, as well as the locality, you could request visual simulations for these areas so everyone can get a clear picture of what's going to happen and what will it look like there. Other procedures would be a comprehensive plan review to ensure it's in accord with the comprehensive plan, a permit application, and in terms of mitigating potential adverse impacts, the application document should include the studies and inventories we've listed here. The application and procedures section of the article should also require a neighborhood meeting. We have found this to be very helpful. This helps inform the community and allows them to ask questions and get to know the project prior to any public hearings. It should include a decommissioning plan, which outlines the procedures for removal of all infrastructure and the agreed upon final state of the site. The decommissioning plan should also include a cost estimate and a scheduled plan to update the cost and any other changed elements. And as Denise mentioned, we would recommend this be at least every 5 years. Another item that should be included and definitely not forgotten is the application fee. The fee should cover staff costs, which is going to be much greater than your typical applications. You might also have third-party review expenses, and so you want to make sure that your staff time and your expenses are all covered in your application fees. Some form of security, and whether this is escrow, surety, or letter of credit, should be provided. Your locality needs to decide which is best for them. Again, as Denise mentioned, we suggest that you not accept salvage value for the decommissioning cost, because this can leave the locality without any security for most of the life of the project. And when decommissioning, there is going to be upfront cost, as well as salvage value is going to depend on the proper decommissioning of that equipment. And so you can't be certain of that, and we don't want to see anyone stuck in a bad place. So we do not recommend accepting that salvage value. Other securities would also need to be accepted for things like erosion and sediment control, site maintenance, fencing, and landscaping. Other conditions to include within the zoning ordinance solar article are going to be minimum development standards to address the land use concerns that Denise was describing. such as the maximum acreage and height of equipment. Battery storage should be addressed. Many solar sites are combining solar operations with battery storage. And so we would recommend a condition that requires 24/7 monitoring and automated fire suppression. Requiring that the building permit be obtained within a certain time frame is also a good condition. This will eliminate projects staying open indefinitely. We recommend 24 to 36 months. We're seeing a lot of applicants requesting that 36 months, and that's fine. You just want to make sure that they have enough time to receive their state permits, but that it's not staying open indefinitely. There should also be a requirement to notify when there's any change of ownership. At all times, the locality should know who are the appropriate contacts. And then this year in Virginia, localities can accept real property, cash payment, or construction of public improvements from solar applicants. And as Denise mentioned, this is, huge, big change, and we want you to acknowledge that in your zoning ordinances. The conditional use application should include all of the items you required in your zoning ordinance. We've already talked about many of these, so I won't go through all of that again, but the zoning ordinance should require the appropriate application forms, the tax map information for the project, as well as adjacent owners list, a statement of intent, and draft conditions. But keep in mind that each project is unique. The use permit needs to consider the individual site and surrounding area and ensure that any impacts are mitigated properly, as well as provide further detail on the requirements that are in the ordinance. The conditions should cover the submittal of all the various plans, the operations of the facility, including noise and lighting standards that must be achieved during construction, operation, and decommissioning, and keeping in mind that, yes, during construction and decommissioning, those standards are going to be very different than during day-to-day operations. Buffers should be addressed. There may be areas on the site that require additional setbacks or that don't need to be planted because there's already a natural buffer, or you may want to require specific plantings and a specific landscaping layout. Traffic should also be addressed. Again, traffic during construction and decommissioning is very different from day-to-day operations. Many localities also require agreements to repair any road damages that occur during construction and decommissioning. Decommissioning is usually something that needs to be considered quite heavily and has a lot of conditions that go with it. The conditions should lay out the requirements for a decommissioning plan, the triggers for decommissioning, depth of removal of the equipment, and the state to which the site must be restored. Again, some of this, changes from site to site depending on what the landowner would like. The form of security should be outlined for decommissioning, as well as other plans that are submitted. Some localities request training for emergency personnel, how often that training should occur, and outline any emergency plans that must be submitted. Last but not least, there should be a condition that details the process for notification of violation and termination of the permit if violations are not corrected within a specific time frame. Our basic recommendations and action steps for planners would be review your state requirements. Know what Virginia allows and check back annually because this is a rapidly changing industry as we've just seen this past year. Review and amend the plan and land use ordinances. These should align with what your community wants, and getting ahead can ease your staff time and create a better process with less mistakes. Consider capacity and fees. Remember, these sites are massive compared to your other land uses. Localities need to be proactive and consider this demand to prevent unsurmountable cost and overworked staff. Evaluate each application based on its own merits. The bottom line should never be who the applicant is. Rather, it should be whether the project's adverse impacts can be properly mitigated so that the impact to the community is a positive one. And then also learn from others. You're listening to us, so you're already leaning and learning from your colleagues, but we would continue to ask you to continue doing that, to learn from your colleagues and your neighbors. In conclusion, we've talked about the demand for utility scale solar, the impacts associated with these large scale uses, and community considerations. We've also given specific ways to amend your land use documents. And finally, we would add that utility scale solar facilities can help meet sustainability goals without compromising a community's character and land use future. It's all about meeting the community's vision and objectives, locating the projects appropriately, and sufficiently mitigating their impacts. We thank you for your time and open it up for questions that you might have for my colleagues and me.
All right, thank you all for that wonderful presentation. I will begin the question and answer portion of our presentation today. This first one is not necessarily a question, but more of a statement. It says the Dominion Energy Integrated Resource Plan filed with the SCC estimates a minimum of 31,400 megawatts of solar by 2050 in their service territory and require 490 square miles, nearly 25% larger than Fairfax County. And again, that was just a statement.
May I add to that?
Oh, yes.
Hi, this is Denise. I did want to say that if you look at the land of solar that's considered in the public interest for Dominion and for APCO, and you approximate the amount of land cover it will take, it's 1% of the state.
Okay. Our next question is, I know the history may not be there yet, but what is the likelihood of these facilities these facilities truly will be closed or decommissioned after 30 to 45 years of useful life, as opposed to simply updating the panels and technology and going on?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think the answer is we don't know. What we do know is that something either needs to come after these facilities, or they need to be decommissioned in a responsible way. You know, right now these sites are hundreds or thousands of acres and seem to be getting bigger. But what happens in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years as technology evolves? Will they need these large sites, or will they transform them with new technology and they'll become even more efficient and supply even more energy? We just don't know. What we do know is it has a significant impact on our current land use and immediate future land use. And once this use ceases, there needs to be a plan and financial means in place to presumably return it back to the way it was, although we're skeptical about that. I'm skeptical about that. But what you don't want is a facility sitting there not generating energy and the panels are falling apart and whatnot. So who knows what the future holds technologically, but what we do try to do is give the localities the tools they need right now.
Our next question is, would you please provide more understanding why rooftop solar shouldn't be promoted more than utility scale? That's the first question. And the follow-up is, what is the status of strategies that combine farming under grid scale solar?
So for the first one, any localities we've worked with, when we amend their zoning ordinance, we definitely try to make it so that we're clear that for small scale, it's by right. And for medium scale in commercial and industrial areas, especially industrial, it's by right. Rooftop is a big deal, and a lot of businesses want to pursue it. And what we're trying to do is put the zoning regulations in place that would, if not encourage it, at least permit it to be able to be done by right, be done easily, be done without a conditional use permit process. However, the utility scale solar facilities are very, very complex. And that is where the push from the industry is. And so that's where the focus has been. But we don't ignore the significance of rooftop. We do try to make sure that it's easy to do. The second part of that, what was the second part of that question again?
What is the status of strategies that combine farming under grid scale solar?
I'm not sure I completely understand that question. There is no farming that occurs around the utility scale solar we've permitted. There are groups out there.
I'm wondering if
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if that question was kind of about, the people who allow grazing of, sheep and that sort of thing under
Right.
the panels.
There is an effort to encourage, if not require, natives and pollinators. There's also, instead of mowing or using herbicides, there are folks that want to allow for sheep, solar sheep as they're called, to graze. They do not recommend goats because they'll mess up the equipment because they eat anything. But we haven't really run into that a whole lot with our applications, but it certainly can be done, and certain groups do encourage that. Our focus is mostly on putting the legal structure in place to handle these facilities, but operators don't know either.
There are locations around the world where people have purposely raised the solar panels so that they can still continue doing farming underneath. And that's just not something we've seen in Virginia.
Okay, next question is, does permit by rule occur before or after local scrutiny? Can they be filed simultaneously?
That is the challenge of solar development, is it can happen before, during, after, getting the timing right there so that the state can do a thorough review of historic and natural resources and maybe provide that to the county to make it easier for the county to agree and confirm the review. They can happen at any time, and all those steps in the PBR can happen for the most part in any order. There is that step number 2. There's a form that DEQ provides the applicant that they must get signed by the locality that says, yes, we approve this project.
Okay, next question is, why do energy costs go up with solar?
If Denise can't comment on that, then I'm not sure we're qualified to comment on that. I'm not sure that's an accurate statement. I don't know. It's outside of our land use planning purview.
Okay. What are the issues to be considered in sitting solar farms in flood zones?
So citing these things in floodplains, you just want to pay attention to the floodplain ordinance. I don't know that we've seen a whole lot of that either. They tend to avoid those areas, and so you see different sections proposed, and they avoid the floodplains and the wetlands. That's part of the PBR process that they're very cognizant of. And then we usually seize on that to encourage them to use those natural areas as their wildlife corridors. Denise, Rebecca, anything else to add there?
I would just say, like any structure in a floodplain, the danger there is when it floods, it could, be washed down and damage downstream. So, another reason to encourage, if you have an applicant that's not already doing so, but to stay out of those areas.
Yes, most of the flood zones that we've seen, the flood areas are also cohabited with wetlands, and so people have to stay out of those altogether. I always push for for wider buffers, whether you're in the Chesapeake Bay area or not. Wider buffers are better, and again, it provides those wildlife corridors.
Okay, that looks to be the last of our questions. We did have another statement here that says rooftop solar is by right according to the state code, and it gives a link, but that does seem to be, oh, here's a follow-up to that statement. It says, provided that such installation is A, in compliance with any height and setback requirements in the zoning district where such property is located, and B, in compliance with any provisions pertaining to any local historic, architectural preservation, or corridor protection district adopted pursuant to section 15.2-2306, where such property is located. But that is the last of our questions for today. Do our presenters have any other information or any other follow-up items they would like to go over before we end today?
We appreciate the opportunity to present to APA Virginia. We enjoy sponsoring this lunch webinar series. What we did here in about 45 minutes, there's another version that we did with the national chapter several months ago. It's a 90-minute session. So if you're interested in this and you want to get a little more detail than what we gave here, it's 1.5 CM credits you can get for that. And we're available as a resource, an informational resource. Our information's on the screen, and if we can be of assistance, just let us know. We're happy to help however we can.
All right, thank you again to you and to the Berkley Group for this webinar. Like we said before, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the chapter's YouTube page by the end of today. At this time, I'll just say, I hope everyone has a good afternoon, and we'll see you in November.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.